It's great to see all of you here this afternoon. I'm Charlie Robbins. I'm the Vice Provost of the university. One of my responsibilities is coordinating the Provost Lecture Series, so it's really my pleasure to welcome you all this afternoon to this week's Provost Lecture. The idea of the Provost Lecture Series is to bring key individuals to our campus, really true thought leaders, people who really can share their work, and beyond that, to really stimulate discussion on our campus. And I think that the lecture you're about to see will really fit that to a T. So I'm really excited about this afternoon's lecture. We are co-sponsoring this lecture between the Office of the Provost and the Center for the Study of Men and Masculinities, which is one of the most important developments on our campus from my perspective. So our speaker today is going to be fully introduced by a colleague and a friend, someone whose work has had a profound influence on my own work as well as my own life, and truly on the whole field of inquiry. So without any further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce Michael Kimmel, who is a distinguished professor of sociology and gender studies here at Stony Brook. He's the founder of the Center for Study of Men and Masculinities and the founding editor of Men and Masculinities, the field's premier scholarly journal. He's the author of many books, including Manhood in America, The Gendered Society, the bestseller Guyland, and the just released and to be reviewed in the New York Times in another week, Angry White Men. So please join me in welcoming Michael Kimmel.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is a really exciting day for me to have my friend and colleague Byron Hurt here on campus to talk about his work, his really amazing work. And I'm not going to say very much about the center. We are on campus, and you can find us relatively easily. We're located in the sociology department. But I want to say a little bit about Byron because it's more, I want to say a little bit about his work, but I also want you to know that he's a Long Island boy. He grew up in Long Island, was the starting quarterback for the Central Islip football team. He went on to play, went on to Northeastern, where he was also a quarterback. You're going to see some of these images, so I figure I'll just prepare you for them. And while at Northeastern, as a member of a fraternity, as a football player, he also became involved in a program that had been developed at the Center for the Study of Sport and Society at Northeastern, through the work of anti-violence activist Jackson Katz, whom many of you may know through his film, Tough Guys, to begin to talk about how men need to step up around the questions of sexual assault and violence against women. At Northeastern, they founded a program called the Mentors in Violence Prevention Program, the MVP program, which has now been taken to campuses all over the United States and throughout the world. It's one of the most successful campus-based and also done work in the military and with athletic teams, activist interventions. So Byron is going to talk about his work as a filmmaker, but I want you to also know that he has a background as an activist engaged with work around engaging men in questions around violence prevention. Because in this country, we often don't think about it as a men's issue. We think about violence against women as a women's issue because we say violence against women there's no subject in it. So we want to talk about, and this is what the MVP program does, is it talks about men's violence against women. By naming and bringing men into the conversation, we recognize it as a men's issue as well. So let me tell you a little bit about Byron and his work. He's an award-winning filmmaker and an activist. He's the former host of the Emmy-nominated series Real Works with Byron Hurt. His first documentary, I first met him actually at a conference. He was working on a movie at the time. He hadn't even finished it. His very first movie called I Am a Man, Reflections on Black Masculinity. And I had never met him, never heard of him. It was a work in progress. He was saying, well, here's some clips, here's some stuff I'm working on. I was blown away by it. I said, this is how to tell this story. All the books I could write, all of the lectures I could give, I said it doesn't have nearly the amount of visceral power. Byron is a really gifted filmmaker, and I want you, and those of you who are like me, like in social science, like thinking about ethnography, like to think about where you insert yourself in the story, how you tell a story through a film. He is without much study, he is a master of figuring out how to be in his film and also move back away from it to let the story tell itself. So it's not like Byron Hurt on Byron Hurt, but he injects himself into the story at critical moments in the most brilliant way, as you will see. So this movie, I Am a Man, just blew me away. His next movie is the one that I think made him a national celebrity, which was Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. It's an amazing movie that really tries to take on hip hop culture and talks about the violence and misogyny in hip hop culture. And then finally, most recently, he did a film called Food Junkies, which won the CNN Best Documentary Award. It's been shown in documentary festivals all over the country, and it was nationally aired on PBS in their series Independent Lens this past April. Now, his newest endeavor, again inserting himself into it, is he's doing a film called Hazing. How badly do you want in? Now, this is not an outsider view. Byron himself is a member of Omega Psi-Phi Fraternity Incorporated and pledged to fraternity, so he's going to talk about being on both sides of what hazing is about. And if you read the sports pages at all, is there anything more timely at the moment? You know, the Dolphins are playing tonight. You know, this is as timely as it gets in these questions of hazing, questions of race and class and gender in the ways in which we organize our sports teams, our fraternities. So this is going to be a terrific thing, and I hope that Byron will be able to talk with us a little bit about hazing as well. Enough of me. Thank you all for coming. Byron Hurt.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good late afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Hopefully you all are doing well. I want to thank Michael Kimmel for extending the invitation to bring me to Stony Brook several months ago. He reached out to me via email and told me about this lecture series and that he wanted me to be one of the guest speakers to present here. And I actually had the opportunity to present at Michael at another conference a few weeks ago, actually, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I actually got a chance to watch Michael present as well. And we also got a chance to kind of hang out and get to know each other a little bit better. We flew on the same plane back to Newark, New Jersey. Together, we had a great conversation on the airplane. And we talked about everything from politics to social issues to our backgrounds growing up and how we got involved in this work. And, you know, I got to learn more about, you know, all of the groundbreaking and critically important work that Michael has done and what has motivated him to do this work. And so I feel very honored and blessed for the opportunity to work in collaboration with someone who has been studying this and writing about these issues for a very long time, much longer than I have. And so I want to give props. I want to give props to Michael Kimmel for doing all of the work that he has done. I also want to thank the Provost office for co-sponsoring this event and supporting these issues, because these issues are worthy of support. So thank you all very much for doing that for me as well. So I wanted to talk a little bit about everything that Michael said in his introduction. Just talking about how I got involved with gender violence prevention, how I went from being a student athlete at Northeastern University to being an anti-sexist activist and a filmmaker, and someone who has pretty much committed my life to raising awareness and getting young men specifically, but also girls and women, to think more critically about the ways in which we have been socially constructed in our society, the ways in which so many boys and men have learned how to perform a certain kind of hyper-masculine posturing in our culture as a way to navigate the world of masculinity, and how we have been taught, really trained, to remain silent in the face of men's violence against girls and women in the United States and around the country, and how I have grown and how I have evolved as a man thinking about these issues and challenging myself and my own attitudes and my own behavior, so that I could be an effective communicator and teacher, instructor, trainer, leader on these issues, but to also be able to be self-reflective enough to incorporate many of my ideas in the films that I wanted to present and put into the universe, into the culture, to get other people to think more deeply and critically about masculinity and violence against women and homophobia. So, because I am a filmmaker, I think it's important for me to show and share my work with my audiences, because I think my work speaks volumes, and it's probably the best way to demonstrate how I try to use my voice and my platform in order to send a much larger message and communicate with people, not just in the United States, but around the world. So I'm gonna start out by showing you a clip from the first film that I made after I graduated from college, after getting involved with the Mentors in Violence Prevention program that Michael mentioned, and collaborating with Jackson Katz. How many people in the room have heard of Jackson Katz, just by a show of hands? Anyone? Raise them nice and high, okay? Everyone in this room should know about Jackson Katz and his work. He's made a couple of really good documentary films himself. He made a film called Tough Guys, another film called Wrestling with Manhood, and he has recently come out with a new film, an updated version of Tough Guys called Tough Guys 2. And he's also the author of a book called The Macho Paradox, and Leading Men, I think is the name of the book about presidential masculinity. So if you ever have an opportunity, just Google Jackson Katz, just do it in your phone. You know, just figure out who he is and look up his work. You can find his work at the Media Education Foundation at www.mediaed.org. But Jackson Katz has been extremely influential in my life in terms of exposing me to the prevalence of violence against women and girls in this country, and the role that men can play, not just girls and women who have been affected by these issues and have been victims and survivors of all forms of violence against women, but the things that the everyday average guy can do. Guys who are not necessarily abusive or who do not sexually assault or rape girls and women or do not batter women, but the guys who care and love and respect women and who know deep down in their hearts that violence against women is wrong and problematic and that sexism is a problem that needs to be addressed, or you just feel like it's inappropriate for a male friend to make sexist jokes or make a sexist comment or treat women inappropriately at a club or a party or on campus somewhere. Jackson was influential in helping me to realize that we as boys and men can shift the paradigm and help to redefine what it means to be manly in American culture. And as Michael Kimmel mentioned, is that for so long, us guys, all of the guys in the room, we have pretty much been told that gender issues don't really affect us, that we should not pay attention, and if we are addressed by women who want to talk about rape culture or sexual violence in our communities, we feel attacked, we feel like we're being blamed, we feel like they're talking to the wrong person. But what I try to do is to encourage and inspire and motivate guys to use their voice in the most positive way possible to challenge other men's thinking and behavior when it comes to sexism and violence against women, and also some of the ways in which we have been raised and taught to think about manhood. And so that's what I do, and I've had the very unique experience over the years to be in rooms with tens of thousands of men at this point, engaging young guys, and also girls and women in mixed gendered sessions, But I would say a good portion of what I've done over the years has been having conversations where I challenge men to think a little bit more critically or deeply about our role as men. And I've also been challenged by men myself around, some of these issues in my own attitudes, in my own behavior, and some of the best approaches to be proactive bystanders in the face of violence against women. And so I've had the opportunity, along with other men who do this work, who I want to acknowledge and give their respect to, I have had the opportunity to speak with young boys and men in youth centers, youth detention centers, juvenile halls, in the military, the Marine Corps, the U.S. Army, the Air Force, football teams, basketball teams, hockey teams, fraternities, all male spaces, traditionally all male spaces, having interesting conversations about masculinity. So my work as a filmmaker comes out of that experience. So I'm going to show you a clip from the first film that I made called I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America. But before I show you the clip, I want to talk a little bit about how that film came to be. When I first started working at the Center for the Study of Sport and Society, I sat down with Jackson Katz, and for me, because I did not have any real education or background in gender studies, there was a really intense period of reading and learning and talking about these issues in ways that I had not done before. And I remember Jackson bought tons of books. And one of the books that I read was called Cool Pose by Richard Majors. I'm not sure if anybody has heard of the book. It's an older book now. It was Richard Majors and Janet Mancini-Bilson, I believe, is the co-author of that book. But it was really written and told from the lens of Richard Majors, who was an African-American man who sort of broke down this whole idea of coolness, right? And how African-American boys have sort of adopted this performance of cool, right? After coming out of a history and a legacy of slavery, Jim Crow, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and legalized apartheid in the South, and other forms of discrimination against African-American men, that part of what we have adopted to survive as a defense mechanism was this whole performance of coolness. And I thought this book was so interesting because it spoke to my life as a young man growing up, feeling the need to always sort of act cool around my male friends, and even in front of women. And I just thought that it was a really fascinating book that deconstructed my life in ways that I had not seen before. And so I was so powerfully moved by this book that I decided I was going to make a film, because I really wanted to share all of this information with other men, especially African-American men, who I felt were on some level trapped by this whole performance of masculinity that Richard Majors unveiled, or removed the veil from in his book. And so I made a film called I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America. And, it was a very crudely made documentary, I will say. I do not like watching this film because it makes me cringe when I look at it. But I think it's interesting to show the film so that you can get a sense of how I got started as a filmmaker, but also to see how I've grown as a filmmaker stylistically over the years. And so that's why I think it's important to show it. So let's take a look right now. You got it? Okay, cool. And then I'll sort of talk a little bit more about it. Thank you.
I think that the idea of ICE came from the long tradition of being cool for black males, being cool under pressure, enduring the elements of slavery, the oppression, the rejection. So you had to handle that somehow. And the way that I guess most men handled it so that they weren't completely emasculated was by being cool.
When people talk about cool, they immediately start talking about the look. The clothes, how you wear your hat, the cigarette, whether you have one or not, where is it, whether earring. These are all symbols. And it says something about what you've achieved or how tough you are or how hip you are, how much you know about what's going on, how down you are, how much money you have. It is completely a lifestyle.
And I guess some people might not understand why it's so important to be cool for a black man, but I know that when I was young, it was extremely important to be cool, you know, to walk cool, to talk cool, to be perceived as cool. Nobody wanted to be perceived as corny. Nobody wanted to be perceived as being, you know, nerdy, because that meant you were less than a man.
It's a defining mechanism for each other. It's a force that black boys have created to bring them to manhood.
I think the theme of being cool went from cool itself to chill. You know, you have people named like Chili T. I used to call myself Chili B, you know, back in high school or junior high school. It sounds stupid now, but now today you have Ice Cube and Ice T. It went from one extreme to the next, you know, and I think that has to do with black masculinity. The epitome of coolness, Ice.
It's like this, man. My mother, you know what I'm saying? Any person's mother, your family, they never really know the things you gotta go through. They only know that young man when he's in the house. When my friends ever came around my mother, you know what I'm saying? You know, cursing, hats off, take out your gold teeth. You know what I'm saying? Chill, relax all that, you know what I'm saying? You're in front of Miss Williams. You're in front of Mr. So-and-so, you know what I'm saying? With all the respect for elders. And that's how my family view it. So when you say how important is it to be cool, understand that once you leave that house, that nest, once you live out that security, you on the streets. You have to handle yours on the streets.
It's a shame that you gotta put on some funny old role like you just really badass to somebody, but if you don't, you're gonna be very disrespected.
Ain't no need living in the community if you don't got no respect. If your peers don't respect you, you know what I'm saying? You just need to leave, move out.
Because all black man life he's been disrespected. Made to do this and forced to do this and forced to do that. You know, so that's why the black man demands respect.
And that's what every boy wants. He wants to become a man that everybody respects and will give the nod to. And basically, when you give the nod and you say, he's cool, you're basically saying to the other person, no need to challenge him. No need to check him out. We've done that work for you, and he's okay. And so you can walk through your day, through your week, through your neighborhood or whatever, safe for that moment. And that's really what it's designed to do.
You think a lot of brothers out there trying to be cool?
Oh yeah, most def. I bet a lot of them that's out there that's carrying guns out there is the ones, you know what I'm saying, usually the ones that's trying to be cool. A lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are, you know what I'm saying? And most of the time, when those ones pull out, they won't even pull the trigger, you know what I'm saying? That shows that they're just trying to be cool, straight up.
True cool comes from true accomplishment in terms of really testing yourself out there in the street. It doesn't come from what you just put on. And that's why a lot of white guys trying to be cool, quote unquote, come across as silly, because these outfits that black guys wear are not arbitrary. They have meaning. And so when other people put them on, they have no meaning. Black men feel very powerful through cool, through being cool, and through all the efforts they make to become cool. And so they don't necessarily see the white man as more powerful than them, because cool is very powerful. It's about being a man.
If the world want to call it being cool, hey, call it being cool. But if you want to call it being cool, you got to see how important it is to have your respect on the streets.
And now they've gained the respect of their community, and they just want to go out and make money and perhaps get a house in the suburbs like everyone else. The rest of the community of America doesn't recognize that manhood.
It's like, people have always told me.
Okay, that's it. So it's so funny. I'm looking at the last shot of that particular scene when the baby was sitting next to the mother crying. I mean, I had no idea how to handle that situation as a filmmaker. So, throughout the entire interview, when I was interviewing her, the baby's crying, right? And so I figured, okay, so I might as well just pull out and get a wide shot of her and the baby, so at least people will understand why there's a baby crying in the background during the interview. But just watching the clip just now, it wasn't that bad, was it? It looks a little old and dated, right? Obviously, and it's a little funny to hear me saying chili bee and chili tea and all of those really old, outdated terms. But those are like some really early sort of hip hop monikers, right? That predated some of the more hardcore names that we know and we hear about today. But that clip was my effort to get underneath this performance of a hypermasculinity that we see with young African-American males. And, for me at that time when I was making the film, I really wanted to make an impact, a positive impact in my community, as a black man, as a filmmaker, somebody who was concerned about, I guess, some of the issues that deeply affect African-American men. And my thinking at the time was that if I could actually speak directly to some of that performance element of our identity, that perhaps it would help young African-American men become a little bit more authentic, shy away from getting involved in senseless conflict or confrontation because of this pressure to live up to some expectation of how they're supposed to be as a man and as an African-American man. And for me, as a young man, and I grew up in Central Islip, I can remember times and moments where I had to deploy and put on this kind of hard hat and present an image or a representation as my sister walks into the room. Say hello to my sister, please, Tondra Hurt. Sorry for that. But so I found myself sort of wearing this sort of hard hat myself and acting in a way that wasn't necessarily true to who I was and maybe how I was raised as a young man growing up, but it was really performance. And so I really felt that I could make a documentary film that could help young men in general, but African-American men specifically, sort of remove that veil so that we could live more healthy, authentic, genuine lives. And so that was, I guess, the intent of that particular scene in the film. So that documentary, I Am a Man, Black Masculinity, took me 6 years. Actually, it took me 5 years to make, right? It took a long time for him to make this film. And at the time that I made it, I was hoping that it was going to be a huge hit and everyone was going to love it and it was going to be everywhere. I don't know if you saw in the clip, I had this hat that said, "I am a man" on the hat. I kind of stole that from Spike Lee. Remember Spike Lee when he used to have all of this, gear and hats, and when he was making the movie Malcolm X, he had those X caps, to help him market the film. So I went to the mall and I went to this little hat center that, wrote names and sayings and expressions on the hat, and I had them put on "I am a man." I'm thinking all I need to do is have somebody see me with this hat on television or in my film, and it's gonna blow up, right? That's what I was thinking at the time. And so the film was not as successful as I wanted it to be. It was supposed to air nationally on PBS, but it was rejected by PBS, right? They chose not to air it nationally, and they cited that it had too many technical issues and that didn't meet their technical specifications. So after that experience, I was sort of devastated. And I lost a lot of confidence in myself as a documentary filmmaker. And I continued to work with Jackson with the MVP program. And I was in debt as a filmmaker. And so I was trying to figure out how I was going to be able to survive and live as a documentary filmmaker. And so at that time, I sort of stopped working for Sport and Society on a full-time basis. And as a result of the fallout from the film not being as successful as I wanted it to be, I got a job doing public relations at Northeastern. And so I spent about a year writing press releases and trying to encourage the Boston media to come to the Christmas tree lighting at Northeastern University's campus during the Christmas holiday. And the entire time I worked in the PR department, I kept saying to myself, this is not what I want to do. I'm not a PR person. I'm a documentary filmmaker, I'm an activist, and I really wanted to be out there in the world making documentary films. And so as I was getting close to my 30th birthday, I decided that I was going to quit my job, and it was a very, very difficult thing for me to do because I was very nervous. I was afraid about, the instability of being an independent documentary filmmaker. And so I remember having many conversations with my family, my mother, my father, and my sister, talking to them about whether or not I should quit my job and move home and, pursue documentary filmmaking. And so there was a lot of fear that I had to overcome in order to pursue my passion as a filmmaker. And I just remember there were many moments where in my role as a public relations specialist, I kept thinking about my next documentary and how I was going to make it much better than the previous documentary. And I knew that in order for me to do that, I was going to have to study film, I was going to have to learn from other filmmakers. And so I decided to move home, back to Long Island. I moved back into my mother's house, back into my old room as a 30-year-old man, and I set about the course of pursuing being a documentary filmmaker full time. And so I connected with a filmmaker named Stanley Nelson, who was based in Harlem, New York, and I became his production assistant, and I sat and I learned from him. I watched him make his films, and I studied his work. I studied the work of other filmmakers, and I made a decision that I was going to strike back out and make my second documentary film. Now, for years, I had wanted to make a film about rap music and hip-hop culture. I had many conversations off and on with Jackson Katz about the representations of manhood and masculinity in rap music and hip-hop culture. And Jackson and I would have these heated conversations about, all of these images that we see and hear in rap music. And I grew up loving rap music, and so I was a staunch sort of defender of the art form, and I still am on some level. And I remember Jackson challenging me to make a film that deconstructed the representations of rap music and hip-hop culture, the deconstructions of manhood in rap music and hip-hop culture. And I was afraid to do it because I was deeply concerned about what my friends and other people would think, people who loved hip-hop, people who listened to hip-hop. I was very concerned about what people were going to think about me challenging and critiquing this art form that was youth culture and that was very popular and that was making lots of money for the hip-hop industry and for artists who were thriving, in a music industry that was giving them a source of income and identity and status and wealth and perceived power. And so I was very reluctant to make a film that was going to be critical of hip-hop's hyperviolence and misogyny and homophobia and crass materialism. I did not want to be viewed as someone who was hating on the culture. And at that particular time, when I actually started to work on the film, there was this sense that if you spoke against hip-hop, that you were player hating, right? That you shouldn't speak out against the music and the art form because it was providing young men an opportunity to earn a living and to move themselves out of inner city poverty and that sort of thing. But I really felt, based on all of the things that I was learning about masculinity at that time, that the representations that we were seeing were growing more and more problematic. And I remember sitting at home. Actually, I had moved to Brooklyn. I was sitting in my apartment in Brooklyn, and I was watching a show called Rap City on a Saturday afternoon. Anybody ever heard of Rap City, seen Rap City? Okay. So I was watching Rap City in the basement with Big Tigger, and I was watching all of these rap music videos. And I kept paying attention to the images of the black men, how they were framed in these videos. And they were very monolithic. It was almost like watching the same video over and over and over again of sort of the hyper-masculine black male rapper surrounded by throngs of women walking off of his Lear jet, and then walking to a huge party where he's like, in a whirlpool in his pink, mink coat with like 10 women surrounding him. And it was like every single video had a very similar look, had a very similar theme. And so I said to myself, wow, man, this is not cool, right? And I knew that there was so much more diversity to rap music and hip hop culture than was being presented in the mainstream through corporate television. And so I remember watching that particular program and pulling out a blank piece of paper from a computer printer and writing down some initial notes about this film that I wanted to create called Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. And I later transferred those notes to my computer and began working on the very early stages of that documentary through the proposal and the treatment. And I submitted the treatment to 13 different funders and got rejected 13 different times for the film, right? I wrote and rewrote the proposal 26 different times before I actually got funded for this film. But I submitted the film proposal and treatment to an organization called ITVS, the Independent Television Service. And I submitted to them 2 times and got rejected, but my 3rd time was the charm, and they actually funded me. And so I started working on Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, which took me 6 years to make. And so at the time, I really felt that if I made a film that really spoke to the issue of hypermasculinity in rap music and hip hop culture, but put it into a much larger social context, that means, not blaming or scapegoating hip hop as being the main source of these representations, but if I framed it as being a symptom of a much larger culture, that the film could be very successful and useful to instruct young boys and men, again, about hypermasculinity as it relates to hip hop, and what we can do to redefine manhood and masculinity. So I'm gonna show you a clip from Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, which premiered at the Sundance Film Festival back in 2006, and later aired on a television show on PBS nationally called Independent Lens. So this segment that we're gonna see is called Manhood in a Bottle. And just to set up the scene before we play it, just to set this scene up a little bit, this scene takes you to a hip hop convention in New York City, where I went to go interview hip hop executives about the images of black men in hip hop culture. And what happened when I got to the event is I ran into these young aspiring rappers who rhymed for me on camera, and I challenged them about the lyrical content and the themes in their rhymes. So you're about to see the scene called Manhood in a Bottle.
Black manhood, by the structures and the powers that be, the corporations, they found a way that they think they could put soul in the bottle. If they could put soul in the bottle, then they could put manhood in the bottle, and then show the bottle and advertise it. And we can follow the crumbs to the big bad wolf.
I decided to follow the crumbs and ended up here at this Hip Hop Power Summit held in New York City. The summit was hosted by Power 105.1 FM, a radio station owned by media powerhouse Clear Channel Communications. There were hundreds of young black men and women here seeking pointers from hip-hop moguls like Russell Simmons, Irv Gotti, and BET executive Stephen Hill. Outside were dozens of aspiring rap artists handing out CDs and demos, hoping to get attention from anyone who would listen.
Listen, these niggas don't know who I am. It's crack, the drug dealer, car dealer, what's the deal? I'm the dealer, man. I could deal your hand, milligrams to kilograms. Where I'm from, Cypress Hill, how I could just kill a man. Call me nice when I'm smoothed out. Even without the dick, got bitches loving the beat. Bring beef, got Mac 11s like the WB. Got thug rappers that can't get over they rhymes. Some niggas quit on they slugs, my guns cocking overtime.
I make hate songs, spit till your face gone. Life's a bitch, and I'm trying to get my rape on.
Man, I ain't leaving the party until the cake gone. Get your balloon pop, nigga, I bang strong.
Niggas screaming out agony cause they chickens is after me. Stop with the crying, see I murder you like Master P. I pack big guns to hit all of y'all faggots. I ain't Nas, but I'm on the bus off, it's still mad at me.
Everywhere I go, and I've been shooting this documentary for like 2 years now, you know what I'm saying? And every time I have kids spit for me, you know what I'm saying? It's all about the same thing. It's all about how you gonna kill somebody, how you gonna, you know, how you gonna rape somebody.
I could walk up to you right now and say, yo, could have been a doctor, or I could have been a pops. Wonder what would have happened had I would have been a cop. Would I help the block, protect the good from the bad, or just be killing niggas cause the power on my badge? You know what I mean? That's nice, but nobody want to hear that right now. They don't accept that shit. They don't give us deals. The industry usually don't give us deals when we speak righteously and things of that nature. You know, they think we don't want to hear that.
How many cats just stood here in front of me right now and started talking about how much drugs they sold? You know what I'm saying? How they will kill you, why they will shoot you.
Okay, now, no, wait. They said that. How many MCs do you see in the industry on TV now talking something positive? How many? None. They're doing it because they say, I want to get there. They're going to do whatever we can do to get there. That's what it is.
I think when you're talking to a lot of these young rappers, the most important things for them is to get a record deal. And what they're hearing from the record companies is that there are only certain examples of blackness that we're going to let flow through this space. And when it comes to hip-hop, there's certain conventions in which we want to see. We want to see kind of the hardcore thug performing hip-hop. We want to see booty shaking in the background. And when hip-hop videos don't fit into those conventions, they don't get played.
When I think about what we call the golden era from like 87 to 92, you know, you had LL Cool J, you had NWA, you had Public Enemy, but you had De La Soul, you had Kwame, you know what I'm saying? And so you had a diversity of black male expression. And so if you wasn't with Chuck D, you can get with De La Soul if you were a Bohemian. You wasn't with them, you can get with Kwame, you can get with Tribe Called Quest, you can get with, you know, Jungle Brothers, you know what I'm saying? So there's so many different types.
The current images out there of black and Latino men in hip-hop, right. Do y'all feel like y'all want y'all sons to be like that?
No.
I mean, maybe some aspects, the business, you know, being an entrepreneur, being wealthy.
They don't see that aspect on TV. They don't see know that this is entertainment.
Working out a deal with with a person at a company. They see 50 Cent on TV with his vest on. Yeah. They see him with his gat on his waist. That's what they see. Because they don't, I mean, the media doesn't want to portray us, or I mean, minority people with, like, they don't want you to see that we good fathers. They don't want you to see that we good businessmen. Exactly. We don't just sell drugs. I sold water last summer. Holla!
So you see the kind of schizophrenia that emerges among these young men, and you get this kind of notion of keep it real. And of course they have to keep it real to sell records. But at the same time, when someone actually pulls their coat, it's like, okay, this isn't really you. What's this about? It's an admission that that's a performance.
When Self-Destruction by KRS-One came out, we was all pumping it and loving it.
I just heard that the other day.
You know what I'm saying? Loving it.
We got ourselves together so that you can unite and fight for what's right.
But now, you can't go to a label with Self-Destruction. Why? Because you're going to self-destruct. The label's not going to put you out there. They're not going to do it.
Self-destruction. Never self-destruction.
Nobody want to hear that shit no more. Soon as 50 comes in, he's killing up shit, he's selling out the roof. He's not got one kind of soothing, educational song, none of that. In the club, hit you with the ball, all of that violence. It's good music, but you know, it got light violent content, and it's selling like motherfucking hot flowers.
The misery that was beginning to really accelerate itself in the Reagan-Bush era in the 80s has been manipulated and commodified by this white male power structure that controls the record labels, that control, you know, urban radio, because every city you go to in America, there's a power this, a jam in that, or a hot something playing the same 10 to 12 songs over and over again. And so what it does is perpetuate the mindset that the only way that you can be a man, a black man, a Latino man, is to be hard, you know what I'm saying, to denigrate women, to denigrate homosexuals, to denigrate each other, to kill each other. There's something wrong with that.
I talked to some young cats, young up-and-coming cats, you know what I'm saying, or cats that are trying to make it as a rapper. And they say that they're not really thugs, right? But they know that in order for them to be successful in this game, that they gotta be thuggish. You know what I'm saying?
And they're confused.
What do you think about
Those
that?
are the same cats who are just listening to the radio and just watching TV. That's all.
TV, they're confused.
Yeah, they don't know. We have trusted the media and the corporations to define what hip-hop is. You know what I'm saying? It's like, back in the days when it first came out, if ABC did a story in rap, you'd be like, oh, I know they bullshit. I know that's not true. But now you see it on the news. You see that you see it on BET. You see it on because they call themselves hip hop now. It's like now Hot 97 is the station where hip hop lives. So we hear that and we don't understand that it's some corporation owned by people who have nothing to do with hip hop who are just trying to cash in. It's like, oh, hip hop lives there. All right, so they must know. That must be what rap is. No, we had never let the media define us, so why are we doing that now?
I went to talk to former Def Jam president Carmen Ashurst Watson about the shift in lyrical content in rap music.
The time when we switched to gangster music was the same time that the majors bought up all the labels, right? And I don't think that's a coincidence. At the time that we were able to get a bigger place in the record stores and a bigger presence because of this major marketing capacity, the music became less and less conscious. We went to Columbia, and then the next thing I know, our producers of Public Enemy were overproducing an Ice Cube album, and then the next thing I know, we're pushing a group called Bitches with Problems, BWP.
And once that perpetuated into one thing and corporations get involved, yes, you'll sell 2 million NWAs as opposed to 1 million PE. And you're going to go from fight the power to gin and juice.
Laid back. With my mind on my money and my money on my mind. Now, once the market forces have helped that shift come along, that's when you get 60-70% of the buying community now is a white community.
After 700,000 is all white people. After your scan passes 700,000, it's all white people, and he's well past 700,000. So the white people want to hear that killing evidence. They want to hear about that shit.
I was on the Daytona Strip when I saw this white guy in his SUV blasting Fabulous's Keeping It Gangsta.
How you doing, man? Pretty good. All right. Hey, listen, man. Where you from? I'm from Columbus, Ohio. We were born and raised? Oh, yeah? Really? Yeah. Is this your car? I wish it was. Are you fronting? Are you fronting like it's your car? Yeah, I am fronting like it's my car, but nah, it's my dad's. How long you been listening to hip-hop, man? 7, 8 years. I mean, since it started coming out in 91, 92, ever since then. What is it that draws you to hip-hop? You know what I mean? What draws me to hip-hop? Yeah. Just the pure emotion in the beats. I mean, I love the beats. I love every lyric that they spit. I mean, everything about it is just it's my style. I mean, you guys, colored people could say that it's their music, but I mean, I can get down to it just as much as they can. Who are you, man? Did you just say colored people? Are you I don't know what term do you want me to use? I'm trying to be. I'm not a racist at all. That's why I feel like I can come down here and just roll and I can have no problems. No one's gonna try to do anything. I mean, I'm just trying to have a good time down here. I hear you, man.
It is something that's as put on as baggy jeans for white boys. It is as put on as a fitted baseball cap and a do-rag. That's all they get. That's all they're gonna be able to get and identify with. And I know you white boys. I seen you. You know, you are the guys who come up to me and ask me why I am the way I am. And if you don't understand, ain't no way I can tell you. There's no way I can tell you. It comes with this.
I've never been to the hood. I've never been to a ghetto. I grew up in, upper middle class, basically white suburbia. We had a very small minority in our town, and that was it. And to listen to stuff like that is a way of us to see almost a different culture, well, a completely different culture. It's something that most of us have never had the opportunity to experience. I've never had to worry about drive-by shootings, and the stuff in the music, it appeals to our sense of learning about other cultures and wanting to know more about something that we'll never probably experience.
Does it reinforce stereotypes?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It does. Especially if they talk about growing up poor and never having all this money, and then they come on MTV or VH1 with their large chains and their nice cars, and they sing a song about busting caps in people.
If you really want to know where this kind of, predatory black man comes from, look back at films like Birth of a Nation.
Birth of a Nation is hailed by critics as a cinematic breakthrough in a great American movie. But D.W. Griffith's blockbuster, made in 1915, spread fear and paranoia about black masculinity with its mean-spirited stereotypes of black men as lazy, untrustworthy, oversexed and dangerous, particularly to white women, and gave rise to the Ku Klux Klan.
If the KKK was smart enough, they would have created gangster rap, because it's such a caricature of black masculinity, yet young people of color are being presented with this idea that somehow these people represent us and they're cool and they're gonna stand in for us against the white power structure, while they're completely subservient to that white power structure. It's really an ironic, sad reality.
I asked BET executive Stephen Hill about reinforcing stereotypes, but he just passed the buck.
Probably should happen is you should look at the people who are actually making the videos. We are, in some ways, partly a video channel and play the videos that are given to us.
As an African-American man, how do you feel about what you see? I mean, do you...
He just walked away without answering my question.
BET is the cancer of black manhood in the world, because they've one-dimensionalized us and commodified us into being a one-trick image. We throwing money at the camera. We flashing, jewelry that can actually give a town in Africa water. We got $160 million contracts because we got happy niggas.
What do you think about that as artists, the ones who participate? Do you feel like you're reinforcing any stereotypes? Y'all talk about that?
They couldn't even look you in the eye. Fuck that. We can really get to the nuts and nails of this. They couldn't even look you in the eye. Number one, cats can't even look a man in the eye. If they look a man in the eye, they think it's confrontation. Why? Because they can't answer. They can't answer to it. And it's almost like now you talk about, and it ain't their fault. This is all systematic. It's all part of genocidally breaking things down to the point where people are going to follow a program that gets played out for them. This is the play. This is the playbook. Y'all going to follow through. And, come on, you crank robots up, they're going to just follow, they're going to do what robots do, what you told them to do.
Do you ever feel that way as an artist? Do you feel like I'm doing what... Okay, I'm going to stop that right there. And I wanted to show a longer clip because there's so much stuff in that clip that I wanted to get to, that I wanted to make sure that the audience saw. One thing I forgot to mention to you all is that I cut my dreadlocks off, all right? So that person that you see there is me. But I love that scene. I love the entire segment of the film, and I really feel like that particular segment, Manhood in the Bottle, sort of gets to the heart of what it was that I was trying to reveal in sort of deconstructing manhood and rap music and hip-hop culture. I wanted to hold the artists themselves accountable. I wanted to hold the hip-hop executives accountable. I wanted to question and examine hip-hop fans. I wanted to really get people to think critically about their consumption of this over-the-top, exaggerated sense of black masculinity that all of us are sort of guilty of doing or participating in or enjoying on some level. And so to me, the scene where we start out and I go to the hip hop conference and I talk to those young men on the street and I asked them to perform on camera for me, I saw their desperation. I saw their desperation in their eyes, and they wanted to impress someone who was going to see them, so much so that they would be given a record deal, right? And so for them to perform those sort of over-the-top, hyper-masculine lyrics was their entree into a hip-hop industry that would reward them, where they would be able to have access to fame, to success, to material wealth, to women, to all of the trappings that come along with being a successful, street credible hip-hop artist. And so the entire time that I was making this film, I knew that the hip-hop that most of Americans and people around the world were being exposed to was a very narrow and very limited vision of what black masculinity is and represents, and that there was a huge range of black masculinity black masculine identity that was not being depicted through mainstream corporate hip hop. And so I wanted to be able to get underneath that and unpack that. And so when I asked the young men to rhyme for me on camera, I didn't tell them what to rhyme about. I didn't say I want you to rhyme about guns and women and selling drugs, but these were the things that they sort of decided to rap about because they were looking for entree into an industry that they knew presented these very narrow images of masculinity. And so when the young man talks about selling water on camera and everybody laughs, that's a very revealing moment, in my opinion. Because what he's really saying is that I know what this game is all about. I know that there's much more to me as a human being. I know that there's much more depth and complexity to me in my life, but this culture, which is driven chiefly by white men in positions of power and authority and resources, are not going to embrace that aspect of my manhood, of my masculinity. He talked about selling water last summer, but did he rhyme about selling water? He rhymed about selling drugs, right? And so young African-American men are very well aware of what is going to give them what they need in order to be successful. And so, like Mark Anthony Neal says in the clip, that it's a performance. It really is a performance. So my job as a filmmaker and as an educator is to get underneath that and to be able to do that in a way that speaks very intelligently and honestly about it, so that we can talk about it and have a conversation about what this all means. And so this particular film, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, has been shown all over the country, in various places of the world. I made this film and I finished this film in 2006, and I'm still traveling around the country showing it almost every week, all right? So it's a very popular film, and there's an educational curriculum attached to it, and it's a very useful media literacy tool for educators to use at their disposal to really generate conversations about hypermasculinity and the ways that we could become more healthy, to achieve a more healthy sense of manhood. So that is Manhood in a Bottle from Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes. So the next thing I want to show you is a clip about misogyny, which I also talk about in this particular film. But I'm going to show you a clip that not too many people have seen around the country. I decided that I was going to take some of the footage from Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, the original footage that did not make it into this version of the film, and I was going to repurpose that footage, use it again, but use contemporary images from today's rap music and hip hop culture to speak to the very same issues that I sought to address back in the early 2000s when I decided to make this film, because I wanted to pose the question to younger generations of hip hop fans and older generations of hip hop fans, has anything changed? Has anything changed in terms of the level of misogyny and sexism that we see in rap music and hip hop culture and in popular culture in general since the time that I made this documentary film? So this particular clip is a clip that is on my Vimeo page. You have it set up, okay? And it's simply called Misogyny. So I want you to take a look at it and see how these old images that were shot, these old interviews that I shot over 10 years ago now, or 7 years ago now, are still relevant for a conversation today around misogyny in hip hop.
Let's talk about Lil Mama. You representing Lil Mama?
So you can't touch it up.
So why you
a lot of dudes think that because you wearing what you wearing, that you deserve to be grabbed.
I should be able to walk around butt naked and they still don't have the right to touch me. It's the beat.
If I see 5 or 6 cats touching on, I might touch it too. But they inviting that kind of thing.
Would you stop the brothers, or would you just let it continue? Honestly,
Honestly,
yeah.
I ain't getting that.
In 2006, I released my film, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, a documentary that challenged the violence, misogyny, and homophobia in mainstream hip hop. 7 years later, the look, the sound, and many of the artists who create hip hop have changed. But what about the themes and imagery in hip hop?
I decided to dust off my original footage and release never-seen-before clips and let you decide for yourself.
Man, your Hampton house, I take your Hampton spouse. Came on a Hampton blouse and in a Hampton mouth.
The bitch that want my dick, then she has to be a dyke. Slap her, but she like it. Told me master, see me pipe. I won't pass the weed, but I'll pass a bitch. Mastermind, the bitch stole my dick. Stuck me up and then hit a leg. Retaliated, had to bust off quick.
Not unlike the rest of American culture, hip-hop has always had its issues with misogyny. This is, again, a reflection of the larger culture. I think that there's a huge connection that people are ignoring if they try to suggest that misogyny or any of these other sort of, social problems are rooted in hip-hop.
Founder of the very popular Bikram yoga empire facing trouble over allegations of sexual harassment.
For Patty Matachero, working for her male bosses at Four Amigos Travel was living a nightmare of daily harassment.
Another day, another sexual harassment claim against San Diego Mayor Bob Filner.
It's not like hip-hop is some sleeping giant on the mountain. That hip-hop's gonna follow the people. Music has always followed the people. The music, art has always followed the people. The music and the art in the 60s is the way it is because of what the people demanded, And right now, this is what people is demanding.
Now, when you're out there and they put that D on you, take that D. Take that D like the champions that you are.
I thought it was very interesting as I got older to try to interrogate the music that I was listening to and figure out why it seemed to attack me and other women so much. And that's when I started to figure out the marketing going on and really what was American culture and American values infecting hip-hop music through its commercialization.
I die over these Reeboks, you ain't even know it. Put Molly all in her champagne, she ain't even know it. I took her home and I enjoyed that, she ain't even know it.
People are set to picket outside Reebok today, demanding that they fire rapper Rick Ross.
I don't think it's about censorship. You have the right to put out what you put out, and we have the responsibility and right to hold you accountable for what you put out.
It was a misunderstanding with a lyric, a misinterpretation where, the term rape wasn't used, and, I would never use the term rape.
Sportswear company Reebok is dropping rapper Rick Ross.
I know that there's negativity in our experience, but the truth is the negativity in our experience is such a small percentage of black life. I challenge the rappers. They say I'm from the hood, black males in rap. Therefore, I have to have this image because I had it hard. And I show them, Booker T. Washington wasn't from the hood, he was from the plantation. And he came up from slavery and built a college.
She coming up, trying to catch breath, I grab a weed like stay down, just breathe, ho. Breathe, ho.
If you got a problem with it and you're gonna say something about it, turn it off and do the work and the investigation to find the type of shit you do like. Because it is out there. Because too many people say we don't like what's playing on the radio, we don't like what's playing on TV, and don't do the legwork to find nothing different, and then end up accepting and singing the same songs and saying they don't like.
People don't want to check each other anymore. Like, they don't want to say, yo, homeboy is wrong, you're wrong. Nobody wants to say you're wrong anymore. People want to be like, well, that's that man, who am I to knock that man for doing what he's doing?
I'm trying to keep it alive and not compromise the feeling we love. You're trying to keep it deprived and only co-sign what radio does. And I'm looking right past you.
You're the first person I've seen that a rapper in recent times that said anything against Molly, and at the end it says, death to Molly. Why did you decide to do that?
Certain artists, portraying these trends and don't really have that lifestyle, and then it gives off the wrong thing. And it becomes kind of corny after a while.
Okay, so that is a clip that my editor and I just recently produced, and I have about 8 or 9 clips that I'm going to be releasing on a new website that's going to be releasing in about 3 weeks or so. And people will be able to go to my site. They'll be able to look at clips from Beyond Beats and Rhymes and also look at clips from these new version images, and they'll get a chance to engage and have dialogue in classroom settings, getting young people to talk about the relevancy of the original hip-hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes with today's contemporary images and representation of masculinity in rap music and hip-hop culture. So one thing that you will see throughout all of my films, really, is an attempt by me as a filmmaker to always place these issues around black masculinity into a much larger context. So everywhere you see me sort of challenging and deconstructing hyper-masculinity within young black males, you'll always see me sort of ask the questions about where else can we see these images, these very same images, these very same examples of hyper-masculinity in the culture at large. So I wanted to ask you, I wanted you to get a sense from you all in the audience. If you take a look at hyper-masculinity, which is an exaggerated sense of manhood, where else in the culture, in American popular culture, outside of rap music and hip-hop culture, can you see examples that are very similar to what we see in this particular film? Anyone? Football, okay. Sports culture? NFL, all right. I mean, we're right in the midst of a huge controversy right now surrounding the Miami Dolphins, right? So football is one location. Where else can we find? Greek life? What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that, please? Fraternities and sororities in particular. Okay. Thank you very much. The prison system, okay. Right, and also a lot of it's hyper-violent, right? It's a very hyper-violent environment, right? Where else? Advertisements. Talk to me. What do you mean by that? Right, or a lot of meat, right? I was watching TV yesterday. I was watching the games, and there's a Taco Bell commercial. And there's a white guy who's sitting on the bench. Does anybody see? He's at a basketball court. He's sitting on the bench, and he's eating this huge flatbread steak sandwich. And it's like this huge, it's like a lot of meat packed onto this flatbread. And he's watching these African-American men play basketball, right? So after consuming this huge chunk of meat, he then has the courage to then take on the African-American males who are, these highly sort of, physically strong, basketball players, to kind of show them how to play basketball, right? And it's supposed to be like a humorous take on race and masculinity in the culture, right? But yes, advertising is another location. Anybody ever seen the quinoa commercial or the Kino commercial that comes on during football games, where there's a young African-American man who's like in this cook-off competition at a tailgate party, and he goes into his cooler to pull out some burgers, but his wife packs a box of quinoa burgers instead of hamburgers, right? And so his sense of his masculinity is on the line, right, with his cook-off competitors, because he has these quinoa burgers, which are basically gendered soft and weak and female, that was packed by his wife, right, against these other guys who have like real meat, right? So there's really interesting ways that we learn about gender through advertising, right? What else? Where else can we find these examples of hypermasculinity? Yes. Pardon me? Blockbuster movies. Can you name some? Okay. Okay, I see. Interesting. Very, very interesting. Okay, so the Avengers movie, okay? What about video games, for example? Can anyone think of any video games? Grand Theft Auto? Yeah, I mean, I've heard it. I haven't really played those games, but I hear that, there's a huge sort of rape culture issue with some of those video games. Is it Call to Duty? Is it Call to Duty or Call of Duty? Call of Duty, right? I was watching TV the other day, and you can find these easily accessible images and representations of men of all racial backgrounds fantasizing about how the various ways in which they can murder people, right? Walking, around with guns and, killing as many people as they can kill. And these commercials are highly stylized, highly glamorized, right? So we see these images and these representations every single day. It's just a part of the air that we breathe. I go to the movies with my wife and we sit down and right before we're gonna watch a movie, we see image after image after image, trailer after trailer after trailer of hyper-masculinity in many of these huge action, movies that are, huge, multi-million dollar, billion-dollar productions, right? And these are the images of masculinity that we're consuming on a regular basis. So I really do hate it when people say that hip-hop is one of the only places, or people always talk about rap music and hip-hop culture, because if we're being intellectually honest, we also have to say that these are images and representations that we see from everywhere in the culture. And in fact, hip-hop is very American. It represents Americana, because the same themes that we see are consistent with the same themes that we see in American popular culture. So those are some of the things that I try to highlight in Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes and my other films that I make. Now, after my film Hip Hop Beyond Beats was made, my father passed away, and my father died from an illness that was, in my opinion, partly nutritional related. And so my father's illness and his passing inspired me to take a departure from the normal topics that I address around manhood and masculinity to make a film called Food Junkies, which aired nationally on PBS. Has anyone seen Food Junkies or heard of Food Junkies? 1, 2, 3 people, 4 people? Okay, so nice little bit of people. Thank you very much. It aired on PBS, and it was seen by more than 1.5 million people. Obviously, many of you were not part of that 1.5 million people. But it's a film that takes a look at the history and the legacy of soul food. And so I want to show you a really short clip from this, and then I'm going to show my last clip on hazing, and then we're going to wrap things up. Is that cool? Is everybody okay? All right, cool. So let's just show the soul food clip.
In the late 1960s, you had young African Americans who were kind of naming and reclaiming different parts of our culture. Soul food was another thing that was being re-embraced, and in some ways it was this kind of romanticization of the way that people were eating in the rural South.
The term soul food evolves out of the Black Power movement. You have the emergence as the Afro as a symbol of Black authenticity. You have soul music, Motown. All these things evolve around that same time period.
At the best moments of the Black freedom struggle, we recognized that we didn't just need to change laws, we also needed to change our living patterns. Come on in, little brother. Come on in, little job and sit down and get something to eat. When you have organizations like the Black Panthers, they not only told us to change our diets, they also imposed breakfast programs and other sort of community-oriented food programs so that people would have healthy living options. And they understood the relationship between a healthy living and a community. They understood the relationship between developing a Black nation and having healthy diets.
The first people I ever heard rejecting soul food was comedian and activist Dick Gregory and Nation of Islam leader Elijah Muhammad.
Dick Gregory has a following because of his stature as a comedian. Then he has this radical change in his life, and it happens because as a form of protest, he decides that he's gonna go on this fast. So when he does this, it draws all his attention. His role as a comic takes backseat to his role as an activist. And within the context of an activist, he has food activism in there.
Soul, she'll call it death food, because it will kill you. You know, it will kill you. When you get somebody my age, what soul food was, then it's not what soul food is now. The difference when I grew up and now is people had houses with apartments and they had gardens and fresh stuff and no chemicals in it. The biggest shock to me is what Elijah Muhammad was able to do to non-believers. My mother, she ain't gonna be nothing but a Christian all her life and would go to war if you told her, but she stopped eating pork.
Why was that?
Elijah Muhammad.
When the Honorable Elijah Muhammad emerges, he put out the book, How to Eat to Live. All of these things created a new model for black living and black wellness that many people carried on. So that even if you weren't buying their political line, even if you didn't want to join the nation, even if you were a Christian, you still said, well, maybe I don't need pork today. You still said, maybe I don't need to eat bottom feeders. You changed your entire diet based on these things.
In the Nation of Islam and in How to Eat to Live, we have referred to a soul food diet as a slave diet because it is the lower realm of food that our former slave masters gave to us when we were displaced Africans under their slavery. But when you know better, you do better.
The Nation of Islam's image of strength and discipline appealed to me as a young black man. Although I never joined the nation, I did change my eating habits based on their emphasis on healthy living. My father, on the other hand, a Christian, thought I was nuts. He said our family had eaten this way for generations and lived well into their 80s and 90s. He saw no need to stop eating the food he enjoyed.
It's Sunday morning, and we had our traditional Sunday morning breakfast with the grits and the eggs and the bacon and the salt pork. All I was eating was like the grits and the eggs and maybe some toast. Realizing that I had rejected the pork, my father was like, what are they teaching you up there in Boston? He was kind of ridiculing the fact that I wasn't eating any pork anymore. Maybe he felt like that was me rejecting him, me rejecting black culture, me rejecting the food that he loved. You know, I don't know, but I know that it made him feel a little bit uncomfortable.
I can understand your father. You can't tell me nothing, especially if you got some education. And I ain't got none. Huh? Who you think you are? I raised you, boy. It was good enough for you.
But traditional soul food wasn't good enough for us anymore, so we changed. My sister moved toward a vegetable-based diet and became the most health-conscious person in our family. And as my mother learned how to prepare soul food in a healthier way, she also began to change. But my father resisted and clung to tradition.
In every family, when one begins to make that shift, the family becomes threatened and frightened of change. Change is one of the hardest things to make. So it's emotional, it's how we were raised, it is how long your father or any of us been eating a particular way, and so now it's ingrained and it's a habit.
Lord, we thank you for how you blessed us to come together today. We thank you for the food that was prepared. We thank you for blessing us to use it for the nourishment of our bodies. For Christ's sake, amen.
Amen. I remember when you and Daddy came up to see one of my football games. Mm-hmm. At that point, Daddy was really heavy. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And it was almost like it was no big deal to him, you know, but when I saw him, I was like really shocked at how heavy he was. But I was always scared to say something to Daddy about his eating habits or his weight because of how he reacted. One weekend when I came home from Boston, I said to myself, I'm gonna say something to him because if I don't say anything to him and he has a heart attack or a stroke, then I'll never be able to like live with myself. Right before I left to go to school, I just said to him, Daddy, you know, I just want to say that I'm really concerned about your weight. He listened to me in that moment, but he kind of tossed it back onto me, you know, and he started talking about how much food I ate, you know, during the weekend while I was home. You know what I mean? So he kind of put it back onto me. Do you think that Daddy was addicted to soul food?
I think he was addicted to food in general, food that made him feel good. Right, right. No, it didn't have to be his soul food. Right, that's true. It was a comfort food. It was something that kept him going, you know, it was something that he enjoyed and, you know, didn't want to give up. I don't think it was just soul food. That I don't think it was just addicted to soul food. Right.
Addictions. All addictions is about pleasure. All addictions about pleasure. Something so awful in your life that you need pleasure.
My pop's life wasn't an easy one. His mother died young when he was only 10 years old. His father was a man who was neglectful, abusive, and drank too much. My dad lived through the racism of the Jim Crow South and had to navigate a society that was hostile toward black men. But perhaps the biggest tragedy in my pop's life was the sudden loss of my older brother, Howard. Howard was just 4 years old and my parents' first child. As the story goes, he took a gun, which he thought was a toy, pointed it at his head, and pulled the trigger. It was a horrible, horrible accident. This happened during the holidays on one of those trips from New York to Georgia. When I think about that, I can only imagine how that impacted my father, the pain of losing his first son.
So, in that particular scene, I talk about my father's pain and trauma, and I wanted to show that clip this evening to talk about the ways in which we as boys and men across race and across class tend to internalize our emotions and not talk about how we feel because of the way society suggests what real manhood is versus what real manhood is not. And so I know enough about my father to know and understand that he did experience a lot of trauma, but for most men of his generation, it's not cool to talk about your pain, it's not cool to talk about your feelings, it's not cool to talk about how you feel. And you know, I really sincerely believe that many of the things that my father had experienced, he's so deeply internalized and did not express that he ended up making himself unhealthy, right? And also my father, and I didn't talk about it in the film, but my father also grew up witnessing and experiencing his mother being physically assaulted by his father, right? And that was also something that my father never really discussed or talked about. And I'll never forget a moment when I spoke to my father in Boston when they came up to visit me, my parents came up to visit me, and I questioned him and I challenged about some things, some problems that he and I had when I was a young man growing up. And my father began to talk about the experience of growing up in a home where he witnessed his father physically assault his mother. And I remember in that moment watching my father break down and cry like a boy. Like I had never seen him cry ever before in my entire life. In fact, I don't even recall ever seeing my father cry before. But it was deeply powerful. It was a very deeply powerful moment for me because I saw the impact, the negative impact that his father's violence had on him. Not necessarily the violence that his father had on his mother, my grandmother, but the impact that that violence had on him as a boy. And so what that showed me in a very real sense is that men's violence against women does not solely affect girls and women. It also affects us as boys and men. And so I believe, and again, this is just a sense that I have, that a lot of my father's self-medication, his addiction to food, has a lot to do with not really having the space to talk freely and openly about his emotions and the pain, the psychological pain that he had experienced as a young man growing up. And I think that that is the experience of so many young boys and men who walk around feeling as if we have to wear our manhood on our sleeve as a badge of honor, that we cannot emote, that we can't express any feelings of vulnerability, right, or weakness. And if we do, then that's going to make us somehow less manly, which leads me into my next clip for the next film project and the final clip of the evening, when I'll open up to questions from the audience, which leads me to my next clip about hazing in America. Right now, we are experiencing a huge controversy around the Miami Dolphins and Richie Incognito and Jonathan Martin and this huge hazing bullying scandal. And about a year ago, I was inspired to make a film about hazing after learning about the hazing death of a young man who attended Florida A&M University, Robert Champion. And I wanted to sort of talk about and deconstruct some of the violent masculinity that takes place in so many fraternities and also sororities, as well as sports teams, military culture, any place that we find or we can find hazing in American culture. I wanted to be able to explore it with the hopes that young men would be given more permission to actually speak up about it, confront it, and reject it. And in the case with the Miami Dolphins and Jonathan Martin, we see a very clear example of what happens when you are a man who stands up and acts out against the code of masculinity, which says that you cannot break that man code and go against some of these traditionally abusive rites of passage that have an impact on people, right? So Jonathan Martin, who left the Miami Dolphins, has been framed as someone who is a quitter, who is weak, he's less than a man, he's not tough, all of those different things, which in my opinion makes it much more difficult for other young men to actually stand up in the face of other men's abuse against them. So let's just take a look at this Hazing clip, and then I'm gonna open it up for a Q&A session. What's up, everyone? My name is Byron Hurt, and I am an award-winning documentary filmmaker. I directed the films I Am a Man, Black Masculinity in America, Hip Hop Beyond Beats and Rhymes, and my latest film, Soul Food Junkies. My films not only air on television, but a lot of them are used widely in high schools and colleges and universities and educational settings. They have a life beyond the broadcast. And I try to create films that are very thoughtful, that are very controversial, that sort of push people's awareness and get people to think in ways that they haven't really thought before. And I also try to make films that are very funny.
It ain't right, tell the people it ain't right.
That turkey neck drenched in pork juice was delicious.
Now I'm launching my next film, Hazing. Hazing is going to be a documentary film that is going to explore the culture of hazing in America. I'm a member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I've been a member since 1990. I've been hazed, and I've also hazed individuals who are seeking to become members of my fraternity. There's something to be said about rituals in our country and in our society, but I think when it becomes abusive, when it becomes humiliating and degrading, and when hazing becomes life-threatening, I think it's a problem that needs to be addressed. One of the things that I really want to explore is the appeal of membership, of social acceptance. What is it that would make anyone decide that they want to become a part of a group so much that they would be willing to endure hazing?
20 Texas State University students have been arrested for hazing.
Cornell University sophomore George Dedun died of alcohol poisoning during a fraternity initiation last year.
I decided to make this my next film project because I was really inspired by the story of Robert Champion.
Orange 25, arrest you. He's on a bucket, he's not breathing. Okay, and you're right by him now? He's in my hand, man, he's cold, he's in my hand.
A band member at Florida A&M killed by his fellow band members as part of, a hazing ritual. And when I heard about his story, it really moved me deeply. No one sends their child away to college for them to die because they're trying to become a member of a band or a fraternity or a sorority or an athletic team or any other club on campus. And I feel like I finally have the courage to challenge this rite of passage that many people feel entitled to participate in. I felt like something has to be done to address the issue of hazing. I expect this film to be very controversial. Some people think that it's harmless and that there's nothing wrong with it. There are other people who think that it's a practice that needs to be abolished. So there are people who have very strong feelings on both sides of the coin. And I really want to get at the heart of the issue so that people can really come to their own decision about whether or not hazing is something useful in our society. Okay, so this is my next film project, and I have to be honest with you, I'm very nervous about this endeavor because of the implications that it may have on many of my relationships with members in my fraternity, and how I'm going to be framed as someone who is challenging a long-held tradition that is valued and that people buy into. And so it's going to be a really difficult process of making this film, but I'm determined to make this my best film ever. And I'm really looking forward to you seeing it and possibly having a huge screening here at Stony Brook University at some point. But this is my work. This is the work that I've been doing for many years now as a filmmaker. And I really hope to leave a legacy, a body of work that outlives me, that speaks to the issues of gender and hypermasculinity in American culture. And hopefully my films will be used as a resource and a tool to make men and women much more critically aware of some of those gender dynamics in our society. So thank you all very much for coming out. Thank you for watching. I appreciate it.